So in the last session, I was going to talk about a bonsai, but basically to compare between landscaping and the bonsai, I basically spent the entire last session on uh, the landscaping design of the Chinese ancient society for the Chinese elites back then. So now this session, let's try not to waste the time away and concentrate on the bonsai. So once again, bonsai, two Chinese characters, the Japanese pronounce as bonsai and the Chinese pronounce as penzai, which means the potted plants, right? So between, first of all, the garden grow plants and the potted plants, what would be the difference there? Of course, the garden grow plants are much more uh, tolerant of the weather, whether that would be hot or cold, you know, uh, humid or very dry. Um, somewhat more. Of course, everything's in comparative terms, especially if you're a Daoist. Everything's comparative. There's no beauty unless you have ugly to compare it to, right? Same thing. So the pot, grow plants, they do require a little more, actually a lot more than little more maintenance, right? So with that, I would say you will have a little more exotic, species that introduced into the pots. So you would have. That's why you would need a greenhouse, right? So in a colder time, you move it in, and then if this thing is too fragile for the sunshine, such as in Texas until like 2 years ago, Texas changed now. So you just have to move it into the shade. So that's the advantage, of course, for a potted plant. But the thing is, the potted plants, of course, requires very, I guess, good pots in the first place. And the Chinese in old days, they'll use clay pots because that's the material and it breathes better, and the water, I don't want to get into the technical part. But anyway, so the potted plants, you can place it and display indoor, right? If you know all the, I guess, mechanics and logistics, uh, and of course, you can put them indoor. But the problem with that is you put a lot of potted plants in your house, that does not look natural. Okay, that does not look natural. So typically, you don't want to do a lot of that. But then um, that was the difference between the garden grow plants and the potted plants, which is bonsai, right? So this comes to the very big difference between the Japanese and the Chinese, because if you look at the Japanese, which they pretty much preserve the tradition of their type of potted plants, right? What they do, they basically trim them and trim them into certain shape they desire, and they do that in the garden too. So when you see the Japanese gardening, like the bushes, they would actually trim it into like half a bowl something, a certain shape, and then the trees, they would like lanterns, several lanterns, and basically from up and down, whole thing trim into that. You will never see that in the ancient Chinese gardens, because we don't trim into any artificial shape. It has to look natural. If you don't see that in the Mother Nature, you will not see that in a good Chinese garden. And that's our difference between the Japanese and the Chinese, right? But that's on the gardening. But then let's come back to the bonsai part, or penzai. Um, do we, the Chinese or Chinaman, trim? Yes, we do. We actually do more than just the trimmings, or pruning, whatever you want to say. Pruning sounds more like a pro term. Not only would we do the pruning, but also what do we do, Chinaman? We actually train. And you're like, wait, what's train? It's like easily the metal wire or just whatever, thread or rope. You bend this thing, whatever the tree or plants, into certain shape. It could be pines, could be whatever other, like basically miniature trees. You don't want this thing to grow like a vertical straight, like a pole, and then just like that. Like in your garden. Actually, in my garden, I even train the trees in my garden too. We do desire a certain shape, but that has to be something you find, but it's available. It's rare, but it's available in Mother Nature. So you're only replicating that. But nevertheless, when you have a potted plant as a Chinaman or ancient Chinese elite, I'm not putting the equal sign between the two, okay? Just the Chinaman tried to preserve the original and traditional Chinese value. That's what it is. So a potted plant, Penzai, right, or Japanese called Bonsai, what does that, really tell? It should tell about your character, your self-improving, purifying study where you are today at the level. That should be a display. Just like your ink brush painting or your calligraphy, it's telling about where you are, right? You don't see that in the Japanese. Basically, you see the, I'm sorry, this may not sound very respectful, but I'm just stating the fact. You see one, you see them all. Why? There's no personality. Everybody just, they do the same, exactly the same way. The shape, you don't see personality, right? Let alone the culture. Where's the culture? The subculture of your individual, the result of your self-purifying, self-improving study. You don't see that. So what is my personal aesthetic value? What is my taste? You don't see that in the Japanese bonsai. They all look the same to me, okay? I don't mean disrespect for Japanese. I actually like to sometimes social with some of them. But being a Chinaman, I think I'm sorry, but I take pride of my own bonsai as versus theirs. Because for us, the Chinaman or the old day Chinese elite, when you do this, obviously because you do the Chinese ink brush painting yourself, so you are very familiar with composition, right? You always design certain shapes of certain things in your landscape genre ink brush painting. So you have that pretty much reflected in your bonsai or penzai, okay? So for those who don't know better, all they want is, oh, I got this rare species stuff in my pot. Oh, okay, great, good for you. But for me, it's really about how do you put what together and basically reflect the philosophical, thought there, right? For instance, I just put whatever the cheap green plants, right? And then they put something that's totally dead right next to each other. What does that say? Hey, you got autumn, okay? Or even winter, right? The death versus the green baby green life. That's philosophical, right? That's the context, right? But then the shape. It had to look beautiful for myself, right? That's by my standard. This is for me. I'm not selling it. Never ever. Because this is my artistic creation. So basically, the Chinese landscape artists, they do both. They do the landscape, on the rice paper, and they do it also, uh, over the little pot. So it kind of, help each other when you practice this way. Because when you do it on a 2D, dimension, a flat, right? That's one thing. But when you have this uh, Penzai or Bonsai or potted plant, you see in 3D, in real image, except for it's like a miniature, in portion. But it does help. So good Chinese landscape artists used to, not today, they used to do both, okay? And I've been practicing both, and I do personally find it very beneficial to do both at the same time, help each other. So, back to the point. When you do the bonsai, what would be the first major difference for Chinaman? One, the garden, remember the Chinese don't trim the plants into certain shapes in the garden because they want to keep it natural. So even if they did, okay, you won't be able to tell. It still look very natural. But when you are doing the pot plants, that's a different story, okay? The first thing first is you don't want a green foliage, okay? The green foliage, what is that? That's boring, right? So you want a certain shape, and then you want to establish a certain relationship with the environment, surround that a little plant. So people, of course, they put little teeny tiny rocks, and then they put like a little bridge and little, figurine there, and start to have a picture. That's what the Japanese don't have. And from there, the Chinese developed into miniature landscaping. And I did a lot of that too. Okay, so you have some cheap, plants that you trimmed and then you train into certain shape. And that takes years, right? But then you provided the environment. Okay, of course, the miniature ones. And it looked like a little courtyard, but it's only about this size, okay? And you do a great job there, basically to reflect your own taste. For the Chinese, for at least 1,000 years, okay, until this current republic, the first, around 1,000 years, there always had been some supplies of, for this mini landscaping design art. Okay, so you can put a little teeny tiny things here and there, and you rearrange them, from time to time, every once in a while, and to get, a new. So before I designed my current garden, I practiced about 5 years of the mini landscaping just to get some idea. Would this look good? Would that look good? That. And I dismissed certain. But of course, when you replicate it in the real garden, in a much bigger proportion, it may not look the same, but it certainly provide the certain reference. And you can basically simulate, that way, and, to see if that would be the taste of your desire, right? So from Penzai or Bonsai to mini landscape design, which the Japanese don't have, at least not in a contemporary society today that I didn't find, you will see that is really a beauty by itself, and it takes lots of time. Now, the key point, this is what the Taoists, what they do. I like to consider myself a Taoist, and I do that. And I take lots of, pleasure. If you Google online, almost every single American city, you would find some kind of bonsai association. And amazingly, most of them are white folks. Were the Asians? I don't know. Go to China. How many Chinese do you think they still do this? So isn't that interesting? It's all the white folks that are doing bonsai, and they love to do that, but apparently they could use a little more reading. What is this all about, and how can you get to the next level and all that, right? Good hobby. I strongly recommend. But back to the point, being a Taoist, when you do all this miniature or mini landscape, what you want to do? You want, just like in the last session, I talked about the Chinese landscape design for the secondary residence. Same thing. You want to show the beauty of the mother nature, and how would you want to establish a relationship with the mother nature, right? And yet it's a smaller scale replication, artistically recreated, and hiding your human touch, but make it look so wonderful. It's just like when you go visit some either friend or acquaintances, household, when they move into a new residence. And of course, bring whatever, flower, wine, whatever. And of course, you compliment. But what you really see is, okay, this architecture's, in style, the design. I'm sure you have your own opinion, and you wouldn't share with the host, right? You wouldn't want to be so I don't know if you offer your critique, just when they're so excited. At least being American, I guess we're a little more political. I don't know about the French or the German or Italians. Do they really? I know the Japanese could be really brutally blunt. Okay, that's not Chinese and that's not American. Either way, so you keep it to yourself on outside the facade, the architecture design, yeah. And then you walk in and you see the interior design. It may look macho, but does that actually tell you anything about the host? What is their subculture, right? What is it that they really like, what they really enjoy? Do you see that, or you see some just popular theme, right? Do you share that? I wouldn't personally. Maybe I'm a little more political or a little more American. I would say, I wouldn't lie. I wouldn't offer any fake opinion or comment. I'm like, oh, wow, congratulations. That's what I would say, right? But here, deep down, I'm like, okay, some, interior design, okay. But that's for contemporary Western, right? Or probably contemporary Chinese, I wouldn't know. But in the ancient Chinese society, you visit a Chinese elite. And of course, the first thing first, you see, first, outside their house, on the columns, you see the couplet, which is model, okay? The model for the host. What is it specifically the host trying to get himself to work on, okay? And then you walk your way in, and then you see the calligraphies hanging on the wall and the Chinese ink brush paintings. Preferably, that's the artwork of the host himself, right? And then you can see where the guy is at as far as the self-purifying study goes, right? That, you don't bother with whatever decoration. It didn't even matter. It's not about show off, but it is a display of, your state of mind where it is, right? With all that couplet and all that stuff, the calligraphy hanging piece and the Chinese art. See, this one, I did this, right? I'm not going to give you a close up because I consider all my paintings at this point are personal. Unless I get to know you, then we could discuss about it. But all the paintings throughout my house are mine. These are Chinese in my study. I did some oil painting too. But this is not to impress anyone. Again, this is for me to practice for my self-purifying study. So now, after you pass all this, and then you come to a little either greenhouse in the backyard somewhere, or even you have a house. You have a room in your house where you basically keep all your own artwork of mini landscape design, right? So you show the people who also practice like calligraphy, landscape, ink brush painting, and read a lot about Daoism. Oh, you guys could have some good time. Basically discuss about this. And is it really inspirational for the other guys for their artworks? And does it really reflect beautifully the philosophical thoughts there? And what about the taste, right? So all this could be great discussion between friends, who really know each other well on the not the personal acquaintance, but by exchange of a few words, you already know where the other side is on. At as far as the level of their self-study or self-purifying study. So if you're somewhat at this close enough level, you would have some very good conversation that is very stimulating. If you're not at the same level, well, maybe you could get some enlightening conversation with the guy. And if the guy's a good Taoist, he wouldn't look down on you. He would just basically, try to work with you in a dialogue. So, of course, you don't want to run into some really ignorant guy, give you some monologue. But that wouldn't be Taoist, would it? So anyway, that was about the mini landscaping extended from Penzai. So in the old Chinese history, it came down together, but has always been parallel. It was two totally different things. Penzai or Bonsai always, emphasized more on the plant rather than the environment. They do put a little something here and there, whereas the mini landscape design is more about a miniature. So the plants would actually be there, but it doesn't take more than like 30% weight. So these were two things. So the mini landscape design, until I'm informed otherwise, I don't know if it is available in Japan. This one in Japan is available. They call bonsai. Chinamen say Penzai, but we're not exactly the same thing. Okay, there's let's just put it this way. If you go to Suzhou, China, right, you can still find those are 300-year-old bonsai, right? And I believe last time they found even 500-year-old, right? But those are not really in a traditional sense of the Chinese Penzai. They were not the best. They're just old, okay? So yeah, that just like black tea, older is better, right? But if you did in the first place, your production was really rough, and the tea leaves were a little off grade. So even let's say 7 years later, it's as good as herb, but ain't the best tea. You can't just tell me odor is that much better, right? So that tells you the difference between the Japanese bonsai and the Chinese Penzai. And I'm talking about the traditional, real, authentic Chinese, not today, the contemporary, fake Chinese. Penzai as far as that goes. Would you want to do something like that? I would strongly recommend to practice your mini landscape, design, and you can get all the materials today online, right? Uh, that's where I got them. I'm not in China. I'm in America, but hey, basically I got almost everything I needed. Sometimes I just have to, do a little art craft work to make whatever's not available online, right? And of course, the other thing is when you order them online from China, a lot of them are just so cheap. I'm not talking about the price. I'm talking about the quality. In my days, people used to take professional pride on what they make. If they go outside and then they're like, "Oh man, I don't want people to know I made this." And today, the Chinese don't care. Uh, Chinese used to be even worse than the German and the Japanese, who today still like, "Oh, I take my work very seriously." The contemporary Chinese craftsman, well, all they care is they calculate how much profit they get. That's why you don't see the brand name in China actually, last long anymore. In the old days when I was a little kid, brand name meant something. Why? Because people put their time and effort and they build the brand name, through generations. And it does mean something. When you look at that brand name, you can trust, right? Do you have that feeling in the contemporary China today? I don't know. Maybe over certain things, yeah. But I'm talking about the mainstream, in general, overall. I'm not bad mouthing China. I'm just saying this so-called great cultural revolution, that, yeah, that impact, that, well, I'm gonna stop here. I don't want to get political, whatever. It doesn't matter to me anymore. So I'll talk to you guys next session. Until then, ciao.